I'm in a cave called Peshmerl, which is stunningly beautiful naturally, but look at this. This is real artistic expression.
For 30,000 years, a hidden underwater cave remained sealed from the modern world. No human had entered it, and whatever was inside had been protected from sunlight, air, and outside disturbance for thousands of generations. Now, scientists have opened this ancient chamber, and what they discovered is challenging what we thought we knew about the past. Inside were clues to an environment that disappeared long before civilization. But the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the evidence became. What secrets was this cave hiding? The underwater cave scientists are racing to save. Deep beneath the Mediterranean Sea, off the coast of southwest France, scientists are racing against time to save a cave that has remained hidden for around 30,000 years. Known as the Kosker Cave, this remarkable site contains prehistoric paintings and carvings that could tell us more about the people who lived thousands of years ago. But there is a serious problem. Rising sea levels and plastic pollution are slowly threatening the ancient artwork inside, and some of the damage may already be impossible to reverse. The cave sits near Marseille, about 37 meters beneath the surface of the Mediterranean. Reaching it is not easy. Divers must first descend into the sea and then swim through a narrow 137-meter-long tunnel carved deep into the rock. Only after making their way through this underwater passage do they reach the enormous chamber where the prehistoric artwork has survived for thousands of years. The cave was discovered nearly 40 years ago by a French diver named Kosker, who reportedly came across the entrance by chance. Since then, dozens of research missions have been carried out to document the cave, study its artwork, and find ways to preserve what remains inside. And what researchers found on those walls is extraordinary. The paintings show a surprising collection of animals. There are horses, deer, bison, seals, fish, and even animals that seem completely unexpected in a prehistoric European cave, including penguins. Researchers have also identified images resembling a cat and a bear. In total, experts have recorded 229 artworks representing 13 different species. But the animals are not the only evidence left behind. Scattered across the walls are 69 red and black handprints. These simple marks may have been made by the men and women who entered the cave thousands of years ago. In a strange way, those handprints allow people today to see a direct trace of the humans who once stood in the same darkness. Archaeologists believe the cave was used between roughly 33,000 and 18,500 years ago. For most of that time, the artwork remained protected by the cave's isolated environment. But the world outside eventually began changing, and those changes started reaching this ancient chamber. About a decade ago, researchers noticed that rising sea levels were causing serious and potentially irreversible damage to some of the paintings. As more seawater entered the cave, parts of the artwork became increasingly vulnerable. Microplastic pollution made the situation even worse, adding another modern threat to images that had survived for tens of thousands of years. But who first discovered this hidden underwater world, and how? Keep watching to find out. The diver who found the hidden entrance. In 1985, Kosker was diving near Cap Morgiou, along the Calanque coastline outside Marseille, an area he already knew well after years of exploring its underwater cliffs and caves. At a depth of around 37 meters, or about 121 feet below the surface, he noticed something unusual in the rock. There was a cavity. Most divers might have passed it without a second thought. Kosker decided to investigate. He swam inside and discovered that the opening led into a narrow, flooded passage stretching roughly 175 meters, or nearly 574 feet, into the rock. The tunnel gradually climbed upward, but there was no sunlight, no obvious end, and almost complete darkness. Kosker returned again and again over the following years. Each dive took him farther into the passage as he slowly tried to understand where it led. At that point, he had no idea He was moving toward one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries ever made beneath the Mediterranean. He was not looking for prehistoric paintings. He was simply curious about what was hidden beyond the next section of rock. But exploring a flooded tunnel alone came with enormous risks. During one solo dive, Kosker's lamp suddenly malfunctioned deep inside the passage. In an instant, the light he depended on disappeared. He was surrounded by pitch-black water with no clear view of the tunnel ahead, or how much distance remained between him and the surface. He had to turn around and make his way back through the darkness. The experience shook him badly. It forced him to reconsider how far he could safely push the exploration by himself. At that depth, a small mistake could quickly become fatal, and there was nobody nearby who could simply swim in and bring him back. Still, his curiosity kept pulling him deeper. Every trip meant another attempt to understand the mysterious passage. He gradually mapped sections of it through experience, memory, and repeated dives. There was no research team waiting outside the entrance and no easy rescue plan if something went wrong. The deeper he went, the more isolated he became. And that isolation mattered. Kosker was exploring a place that almost nobody else could reach, meaning every discovery depended on his ability to return safely. Each meter of progress had to be earned through careful diving, patience, and a willingness to accept risks that most people would never consider taking. For years, he continued this way, but by 1990, Kosker finally realized that the passage had become too long and too dangerous to explore alone. He had reached the point where curiosity was no longer enough. He needed help, and that decision would change everything. Because the next people who entered the cave would discover that Kosker had not simply found an underwater tunnel. He had found a doorway into the prehistoric past. What did the divers discover after finally reaching the hidden chamber? Let's find out. The moment the hidden chamber was finally reached. In 1990, Kosker knew he could no longer explore the dangerous passage alone, so he brought in two Belgian cave divers, brothers Bernard and Mark van Espen, to help extend the safety guideline deeper into the tunnel. The task was anything but simple. The divers had to move carefully because the floor was covered with fine sediment. One careless movement could stir up the silt and turn the water into a cloud of darkness, leaving a diver unable to see even a few inches ahead. Eventually, they reached something that changed the mystery completely. They discovered an underground lake with a pocket of trapped air above the water. That suggested there was a dry section somewhere beyond the flooded passage. But there was a problem. Their guideline ended before they could safely continue. They had no choice but to turn back. The question of what existed beyond the lake remained unanswered for almost another year. Then, in June 1991, Mark van Espen returned. This time, he extended the guideline far enough to reach the hidden area beyond the flooded tunnel. His dive was relatively short, and he explored only the first chamber, but it proved something important. The dry section was real. More importantly, it could be reached safely. A few weeks later, Kosker returned for what would become the most important dive of his life. On July 9, 1991, he entered the cave with his niece, Sandrine Kosker, and friends Jan Gogan and Pascale Oriol. Together, they pushed farther into the dry chambers than anyone had gone before. Then they saw the walls. The cave was covered with markings, but Kosker's first reaction was not amazement. He later recalled thinking that someone had somehow entered the chamber and spray-painted graffiti across the rock. And honestly, the idea of prehistoric artwork seemed almost impossible. How could paintings created thousands of years ago exist inside a chamber that could only be reached by scuba diving through a flooded tunnel? But as Kosker and the others looked more closely, the truth slowly became clear. This was not modern graffiti. These markings had been waiting in the darkness for tens of thousands of years. The discovery was extraordinary because the cave had effectively been cut off from the outside world. Whatever happened inside that chamber after the entrance disappeared beneath the sea had remained hidden from modern humans. For the first time, someone was standing face to face with evidence left behind by people who lived during the Ice Age. It should have been the triumphant ending to years of dangerous exploration. Instead, The discovery was followed by tragedy. Within weeks, several divers who had become involved in exploring the cave would lose their lives. And suddenly, Kosker Cave was no longer simply an incredible archaeological discovery. It had become a place surrounded by danger, mystery, and questions that demanded answers. What did those ancient paintings reveal about the people who made them? Stay tuned to find out. The paintings that rewrote what we know about prehistoric life. When Jean Courtin and Jean Clote entered the chamber, they were trying to document whatever had survived inside a place that had already claimed the lives of 3 people, including the determined diver who first found it. The 2 respected French prehistorians began a careful survey of the walls, and what they discovered made the dangerous journey seem like only the beginning of the story. The paintings appeared to date back roughly 20,000 years. Lascaux, the prehistoric cave that became the benchmark for Paleolithic art, is younger. Yet, here were images created even earlier, hidden beneath Mediterranean seawater, and reached only through an underwater passage that had already proven deadly. But the real surprise was waiting on the walls. To understand why, consider where these people lived. Kosker was once near the coast, in a world where the sea was not simply something seen from a distance. It was part of their food, their daily lives, their surroundings, and their understanding of the world. So perhaps the most important question is simple. What would people paint when the sea was part of everything they knew? The answer was written directly into the stone. There were animals familiar from prehistoric European art: bison, horses, ibex, and enormous megaloceros deer. These creatures fit comfortably into what archaeologists already understood about Paleolithic cave art. But alongside them were images that were far more surprising and unexpected. Seals, fish, aurochs, and other marine animals. That makes Kosker extraordinary. It is the only known prehistoric cave site where humans painted marine life alongside the animals normally found in Paleolithic art. The paintings suggest that the people who created them were closely connected to the coast, and that connection may have shaped what they chose to record on the walls. The strange part is that this art survived in a place that eventually disappeared beneath the sea. The underwater environment may have helped protect some of the paintings. Stable temperatures, little exposure to oxygen, and protection from wind and rain reduced the kinds of damage that could destroy exposed rock art. In other words, the same sea that now makes Kosker so difficult to reach may also have helped preserve its ancient artwork. The paintings are real, the evidence has been documented, and their age has been established. But one mystery remains. How did a cave that once stood inland, more than 100 meters above today's sea level, end up beneath the Mediterranean? And what happened to the coastal world these prehistoric artists once knew? Keep watching to find out. The coastline that disappeared beneath the sea. The answer was not a sudden flood or one catastrophic event that happened on a specific day. What happened to the Kosker cave was slower, more powerful, and in some ways, much harder to imagine. The landscape changed over thousands of years as the planet moved out of the last ice age. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, enormous amounts of Earth's water were trapped inside massive ice sheets. These covered huge parts of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia, with some ice reaching several kilometers in thickness. With so much water locked away on land, global sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. The Mediterranean coastline looked completely different. Sea levels were roughly 120 meters lower, meaning land that is now hidden beneath the water was once dry ground. What we see today as the seafloor was then a coastal plain, where people could walk, hunt, gather food, and live. The Kosker cave itself was approximately 6 kilometers from the shoreline and stood well above sea level. For the people who created its paintings, there was nothing unusual about entering that cave. They simply walked across the landscape, reached a cliff, entered the passage, and moved into the chamber. The sea was nearby, but it was not where it is today. There was no underwater entrance to navigate and no dangerous dive required to reach the paintings. Then, the climate began to change. As temperatures gradually increased, the enormous ice sheets started retreating. Meltwater flowed back into the oceans, and sea levels slowly began to rise. This process did not happen overnight. It unfolded over thousands of years, but the result was relentless. The coastal plain around Kosker began to disappear. The shoreline moved closer and closer to the cave. Land that had once been walked across by prehistoric people was gradually swallowed by the Mediterranean. Eventually, the water reached the cave's entrance and began moving into the passage. The transformation was almost impossible to notice from one generation to the next, but over centuries and millennia, it completely changed the landscape. The tunnel eventually filled with seawater, effectively cutting the cave off from the world outside. The chamber above remained sealed away, separated from the ocean by the underwater passage. Inside, the paintings were left in an environment the original artists could never have imagined. The coastline they knew was gone. And that creates an even bigger mystery. The land surrounding Kosker almost certainly contained other traces of prehistoric life. There may have been camps, tools, shelters, and perhaps other painted caves along that ancient coastline. But unlike Kosker, most of those places had no protected chamber high enough to preserve them. They may now lie beneath layers of marine sediment, destroyed by erosion, or simply waiting somewhere beneath the Mediterranean with no way for researchers to reach them. Kosker survived because of the unusual combination of its position, its structure, and its underwater entrance. In a strange twist of history, the rising sea that threatened to destroy the cave may also have helped protect part of what was inside. But Kosker may not be an isolated case. As scientists began reconstructing the ancient coastline, they realized something much bigger was happening beneath the world's oceans, and it suggests that the prehistoric world we know today could be only a tiny fragment of what once existed. But why did some experts believe these ancient paintings might actually be fake? Stay tuned to find out more. Why experts first thought the cave might be a forgery. France has more decorated Ice Age caves than any other country in the world. But before Kosker Cave was discovered, every known decorated cave had been found west of the Rhone River. Nothing like this had ever been documented east of the river, in the Provence region. That unusual location immediately raised questions. Some prehistorians were not convinced the paintings were genuine. Their doubts became even stronger when details of the artwork began appearing in the press. One image seemed to show something resembling a penguin. That was a problem because nobody expected to find a penguin-like animal among French Ice Age paintings. Other details also looked strange. Some of the handprints appeared to have fingers deliberately missing, while several painted horses seemed to line up almost perfectly with the cave's present-day waterline. To some critics, those details were too convenient. The idea that someone could have created a sophisticated forgery inside an underwater cave sounded difficult to believe, but the location itself was so unusual that some experts were willing to consider it. The controversy even reached the Spanish newspaper El País, where questions were raised about whether the entire site could be an elaborate fake. But other researchers quickly urged caution. Spanish prehistorian Antonio Beltrán responded that although he had never personally seen penguin-like figures in prehistoric cave art, rare animals appearing in unusual artwork did not automatically make a discovery fraudulent. Other uncommon species, including the snowy hare, had already been identified in authenticated prehistoric paintings. In other words, strange did not necessarily mean fake. Still, the questions could not simply be ignored. The only way to settle the argument was to examine the cave properly and gather physical evidence that could either support or destroy the forgery theory. That process began in earnest, with major excavation and conservation campaigns in 1992 and 1994. Jean Clottes and a growing team of specialists carefully studied the paintings, carvings, surfaces, and conditions inside the cave. And the more evidence they collected, the weaker the forgery theory became. The artwork was not simply unusual. It showed characteristics consistent with genuine Paleolithic art, while the cave itself contained physical clues that were extremely difficult to explain as a modern creation. But this investigation did something even more important. It began answering the biggest questions surrounding the entire discovery. If these paintings were truly created during the Ice Age, when the cave was dry and accessible to humans, how did they end up more than 30 meters beneath the Mediterranean Sea? The answer would completely change the way scientists understood what had happened to this ancient coastline. But If experts doubted it, what finally proved the cave was ancient? Let's find out. The science that finally proved the cave was ancient. During the last ice age, the coastline around Kosker Cave looked nothing like it does today. Sea levels were roughly 100 to 120 meters lower because enormous amounts of water were trapped inside glaciers and continental ice sheets. What is now the Mediterranean seabed was then dry land. The cave itself sat about 6 kilometers inland, overlooking an open, steppe-like landscape rather than the sea. For the people who lived there, the coastline was somewhere beyond the horizon. They could walk across the land surrounding the cave without ever imagining that thousands of years later, the same ground would be buried beneath seawater. Then the planet began to warm. Around 10,000 years ago, during the Holocene, glaciers and ice sheets started melting rapidly. Water that had been locked away for thousands of years began flowing back into the oceans. Across the world, sea levels rose, and the Mediterranean slowly pushed inland. It happened gradually. The coastline moved closer to the cave over thousands of years. The valley in front of the entrance disappeared beneath the rising water. Eventually, the sea reached the cave itself and submerged the entrance, cutting off the dry route that prehistoric people had once used. By roughly 9,000 years ago, the cave was completely inaccessible from the surface. Nobody had deliberately hidden it. The planet had simply drowned it. Instead of being sealed behind a collapsed rock wall, Kosker was locked away behind seawater. That strange underwater barrier helped explain how paintings created during the Ice Age could remain hidden from modern humans for so long. But there was still one major problem. Scientists needed to prove that the artwork was actually as old as they believed. The first age estimates were controversial. Some researchers questioned whether the paintings were truly tens of thousands of years old. Since radiocarbon dating such ancient material is difficult, researchers looked for other clues. One strong piece of evidence came from calcite, a mineral that forms slowly on rock surfaces. Thin calcite layers had grown directly over several paintings, proving the artwork was older than the mineral covering it. Then, in 1998, researchers found additional evidence in the form of wood fragments and pollen from the cave. These organic materials provided another way to establish when the cave had been used. Jean-Claude and Jean Corton eventually collected 27 separate radiocarbon dates from the site. The results clustered around two major periods, one roughly 27,000 years ago and another around 19,000 years ago. That was a remarkable discovery in itself. The cave had not been decorated during one short period by a single group of people. Different prehistoric communities had returned to the same underground space thousands of years apart. Later research expanded the evidence even further. Between 1992 and 2012, researchers carried out around 60 radiocarbon tests on 41 different samples from the cave. Together, those results showed that people had visited Kosker from roughly 33,000 years ago to around 19,000 years ago, with two major and nearly continuous periods of activity. The earliest visitors were associated with the Gravettian culture, which was widespread across Europe around 27,000 years ago. Many of the cave's hand stencils are linked to this earlier period. The later visitors belonged to the Solutrean culture, which flourished around 19,000 years ago. These people were known for advances in stone tool technology, including techniques for attaching stone blades to wooden handles made from materials such as pine and birch. Across Europe, this same period is also associated with the appearance of famous carved Venus figurines. So the people who returned to Kosker thousands of years after its first visitors were not simply repeating what their predecessors had done. They came from a different cultural period, with different tools, different techniques, and possibly different ways of seeing the world. Once science confirmed its age, why did France hide the cave? Keep watching to find out. The cave that France kept secret for decades. In March 1992, researchers made another discovery inside the Kosker cave system. They found a second entrance, separate from the underwater passage Henri Kosker had followed years earlier, but this time they kept it secret. French authorities decided not to reveal the location of the second entrance publicly. That secrecy lasted for more than 30 years. The reason was simple. Protecting the cave mattered more than satisfying public curiosity. A second entrance could have made unauthorized access much easier, and in a cave containing prehistoric artwork that had already survived for tens of thousands of years, even a small number of uncontrolled visitors could cause serious damage. That decision shows just how fragile Kosker has become. Today, the original cave is not open to ordinary visitors. Access is restricted to a small number of qualified researchers working under strict scientific supervision. French authorities and archaeological teams continue to organize carefully controlled research missions, trying to learn as much as possible without speeding up the cave's deterioration. But protecting the cave has not always been straightforward. Henri Kosker, the diver who discovered it, later became involved in a legal dispute with France's Ministry of Culture. He sought compensation and a share of profits connected to the discovery under a French law introduced in 2001, which gives discoverers of archaeological sites certain rights to financial compensation based on their discoveries. While those arguments continued, another challenge remained. How could ordinary people experience Kosker without putting the original site at even greater risk? The answer was to recreate it. On June 4, 2022, a detailed full-scale replica known as the Kosker Méditerranée opened in Marseille. The reconstruction was created by the same company involved in the replica of the famous Chauvet Cave farther north. The experience was designed to give visitors a sense of what it feels like to enter the real cave. Visitors move through specially designed exploration pods that recreate the sensation of emerging from underwater into the hidden chambers. Then, they enter a painstaking reconstruction of the cave's walls. Paintings and engravings have been reproduced in remarkable detail, including the famous panel containing the horses. Researchers have also created a detailed digital scan of the surviving upper sections of the real cave. That digital record may eventually become even more important than the replica itself. Geologist Jacques Collina-Girard has described this kind of digital preservation as a memory of a place that the sea will eventually reclaim. And that possibility is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The original cave remains sealed behind seawater and strict access restrictions, much as it has been for thousands of years. But unlike the prehistoric artists who left their marks behind, modern researchers know the cave is slowly disappearing. They can record it. They can recreate it. They can study it. But they cannot stop the sea forever. And despite decades of exploration, dating, scanning, and conservation, Kosker still holds a long list of basic questions that researchers have not been able to answer. After decades of secrecy, what questions does Kosker still hide? Stay tuned to find out. The questions Kosker still refuses to answer. Even after decades of research, some of Kosker Cave's biggest mysteries remain unsolved. Nobody can say for certain why marine animals appear so prominently on its walls when almost no other Ice Age cave art in Europe focuses so heavily on sea life. Why did these prehistoric artists choose seals, fish, and other marine creatures alongside the horses, bison, and deer seen across other caves? Then there are the hand stencils. Some appear to show fingers folded or missing, but nobody knows exactly what that gesture meant. Was it symbolic, cultural, or simply the result of how the hands were positioned? The answer may have disappeared with the people who made them. There is another mystery too. Two groups separated by roughly 8,000 years returned to the same difficult-to-reach cave. Did the later artists know about the earlier paintings? Did they understand what those markings meant? Or were they simply creating their own art in a place that still felt special to them? What we do know is supported by years of difficult research. Radiocarbon dating, calcite analysis, digital mapping, and underwater archaeological missions have established that the cave is genuinely ancient. What began when one diver followed a strange opening in an underwater rock face became one of the world's most unusual Ice Age art discoveries. A rising sea that could have destroyed the cave instead sealed parts of it away, preserving a rare glimpse of a prehistoric coastal world. But the sea is still rising, and the cave is still changing. Scientists can document its secrets, but they may never uncover all of them before the Mediterranean finally takes Kosker back. So, what are your thoughts about the discovery of this 30,000 years old cave? Let us know in the comments section below. In the end, Kosker Cave remains a remarkable glimpse into the Ice Age, hidden beneath the Mediterranean for thousands of years. Its paintings reveal a lost world, while rising seas threaten its survival. The mystery continues. Like, subscribe, and join us.